Welcome to the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. We're breaking down why Americans are seeing their electricity bills climb. And a new analysis argues that one major factor has been hiding in plain sight. For years, debates over rising electric rates have focused on everything from booming data center demand to utility profit structures to the impact of subsidized wind and solar. But a new report from Dr. Jonathan Lesser points to what he calls the missing link, the changing mix of generating resources. Between 2010 and 2024, the U.S. actually added plenty of generation capacity, about 200,000 megawatts. In theory, more supply and only a modestly higher demand should mean lower prices, but the opposite happened. The key is what type of power was added and what was retired. The nation retired more than 80,000 megawatts of dispatchable power, coal, natural gas, and nuclear plants that run on demand and operators can count on around the clock. At that same time, the grid added roughly 240,000 megawatts of wind and solar, resources that produce electricity only when the weather cooperates. And more dispatchable energy is expected to be retired in the next 2 years. Three factors have driven retiring dispatchable power: some states' policies, zero-emission mandates, and federal subsidies for wind and solar that have pushed wholesale prices below zero and led to retirements due to profitability. The shortage is now showing up in capacity markets where generators are paid simply to be available when needed. And PJM, the largest grid operator in the country, capacity prices have skyrocketed, jumping from about $29 per megawatt day to more than $270, and in some regions over $400. Those costs ultimately flow to households and businesses. Lesser warns that a push towards zero-emissions grid won't succeed if it results in unaffordable or unreliable electricity, which is why many large data centers are turning back to nuclear, gas, and even coal for steady power. Policymakers must address the physical and economic limits of relying too heavily on intermittent energy as electricity becomes a bigger burden for families. To discuss the energy affordability issue at hand, I'm joined now by Dr. Jonathan Lesser, the brief's author. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Maggie.
So your study pointed out that average residential electricity rates are up about 60% since 2010, much more in some states. Since that is a particularly hard thing for everyday Americans, if you were to explain this to a neighbor over the fence and you only got their attention for a couple minutes, how would you answer this simple question: why is my power bill up so much?
Well, I would probably tell the neighbor that there's probably a number of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons that I focus on in the report is that we have been retiring reliable, old and cheap generation and replacing it with more costly wind and solar. And the problem with wind and solar, despite people saying it's low cost, it's not available when you need it. So it's low value electricity, not high value electricity. And so you have to spend a lot more money to provide the electricity when people want it. And there's one other reason in for some states, regulators are deliberately pursuing policies to make electricity more expensive so people won't consume as much.
I feel like that just wouldn't work, right? You would think rising the price, nobody's going to be like, I guess I'm not going to turn on the lights today. I mean, they still need the electricity to use for whatever it is that they need it for. That's not really going to change.
Well, but it's funny that you should say that, because in Southern California, in fact, that's what people are having to do. They have, in the summer, the rates are up so much in some hours of the day, early evening, it's over $1 a kilowatt hour. And so I've talked to people who literally say they have to shut the curtains in the house, they shut off all the lights, curtains, the air conditioning, and they sit in the coolest room of the house until the electricity rate goes down. Now, to me, that's just wrong.
I would agree, but to talk more about the affordability issue, since affordability, especially energy affordability, is a hot topic and even a bipartisan one, the issue of the day now, if you had to identify, just say, two key things that should be done to address that rising challenge, what would those be?
Well, the first thing I would do is I would end all of the subsidies for wind and solar and other low value electricity. I'd end those immediately, and I think you'd find that a lot of those generators, the owners of those, would end. And the second thing I would do is I would try to restore as quickly as possible the generation that's been retired. And that's happening in some cases where we're bringing back nuclear power plants. The administration is loaning money to restore the old 3 Mile Island nuclear plant. Um, I think that's one thing to do. I'd also probably get rid of some of the other policy mandates, one such as, you must drive an electric vehicle or purchase an electric vehicle. You must replace the gas furnace with electric space heat, electric heat pumps. Well, those are all increasing demand artificially, and you're replacing a low-cost source of energy with higher-cost sources, and that makes people worse off.
So how much of the electricity price hikes that we've been seeing are coming from the green policies that we've enacted?
It really depends on the state. I mean, let's take California as an example. They have the highest rates in the nation other than Hawaii, and they also have the largest increases, over 100% in 15 years. And so the average rate now is over 32 cents a kilowatt hour. That's really expensive. They have not only green energy policies, but because of a lot of decades of wildfire mismanagement, they allowed their utilities are now starting to underground all the lines. Well, that definitely reduces wildfire risk, but it's extremely costly. And so customers are having to pay a lot for that. Now, in other states, like, say, Massachusetts, which has the second highest rates, wildfires aren't an issue. It's the green energy policies. They've gotten rid of their coal plants, the nuclear plants, and they're focused solely on wind and solar, including very costly offshore wind. And so that's what's really driving it. Plus, they belong to something called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which essentially imposes a carbon tax on electric utilities, which raises prices for customers even more.
I thought we were told that wind and solar would be cheap. Are they not? Is it because we need to then add in intermittent energy to be able to actually be able to use wind and solar effectively?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, what I refer to wind and solar is their low value. And it's kind of like, if you go to the grocery store, you'll see the generic store brands. Sometimes it's okay, but sometimes it's not nearly as good as the name brand stuff. It's cheaper, but but the quality is lower. So, what the problem with wind and solar is, they are inherently intermittent. And to fix that, you have to build more generation as backup, fossil fuel generation, that typically natural gas. You also have the new thing is battery storage, which is incredibly costly. So you have to turn low value wind and solar electricity into high value, useful electricity when people want it. It costs a lot of money.
And why does it matter that we have retired older plants?
Well, what we've done is we've retired dispatchable. In other words, plants that operate all the time, you can depend on them. You know when they're going to operate. And we've replaced it with wind and solar. So over the last 10 years, we've retired roughly 80,000 megawatts. That's 80 nuclear plants worth of dispatchable fossil fuel and nuclear generation. And we're replacing it with wind and solar. And the result is you have higher costs. People live in the mid-Atlantic states, including Washington, D.C., New Jersey, Pennsylvania. They're part of an organization called PJM. And PJM kind of oversees the regional transmission grid and all the generating plants out there. And they serve about 65 million people. Well, PJM's costs are going up because they need energy capacity. So, in other words, they have to have enough iron in the ground to meet demand when it's greatest. So, when that happens, when you start losing all the dispatchable, reliable generation, and you replace it with wind and solar, which you can't rely on because you don't know if is the wind going to be blowing now. And obviously at night, when actually electricity demand is greatest, people come home from work. There's no solar. So the prices for capacity have soared. They've gone up by a factor of 10, 1,000%. So that's really contributing to costs. And everyone's screaming at PJM now, what are you doing? Everything's wrong. Well, it's politicians and regulators. Basically, it's their policies that are causing this.
And there are some politicians saying that we have to pursue policies to address climate goals. Is it possible to do that and keep energy costs down?
Well, yes, it is. But the climate goal, first off, what we do as a country to reduce carbon emissions is going to have no measurable impact on world climate at all, because the United States, and in fact, developing the developed world, account for increasingly or a smaller and smaller share of greenhouse gas emissions. So whatever we do really is not going to matter. But if politicians want to have cleaner energy, and everybody wants that, nobody likes pollution, they've got to focus on, first, more natural gas, bridging that to more nuclear power. And I would also encourage basic research and development efforts on, improving clean energy techniques, better batteries, lower cost nuclear, especially, rather than just handing out billions and billions of dollars of subsidies. I think focusing on basic R&D, and then when the stuff is actually ready, you can start deploying it.
As we wrap things up, what are key takeaways you want people to walk away with from your brief as we're looking ahead to the future of energy in America?
Well, I think that to me, electricity is becoming far more important in modern day life. We've got more electric gadgets, computers, cell phones, things like this interview where it's virtual, depends on electricity. If you're going to do that, it's really crucial to make sure people can afford electricity. So what I would focus on is, one, let's focus on what are the most cost-effective ways to provide the services that energy provides. So for example, that means, a natural gas furnace is much cheaper for somebody to heat their house than running it on electricity that happens to be generated by a natural gas electric plant. You just lose a lot more energy that way. Secondly, to keep things affordable, we need to end all the political mandates. Really, all they're doing is lining various parties' pockets, and that's on both sides of the aisle. That doesn't help the citizens for affordable energy at all. So end those mandates, focus on more R&D to develop lower cost, reliable nuclear power. And I think it's not going to happen overnight, but it's a way to, set a path where we can have abundant, reliable, and affordable electricity.
Jonathan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
That was it for the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. I'll see you next time.